So the goal of using the ground goop is to solve the problem that occurs because the track is sitting up on cork roadbed everywhere on the railroad, but when it's coming through a town like here in Bel Air, I really don't want it to be so elevated above street level, if you will, for lack of a better term. And so what I've done, I don't know if you can see it previously, is I've done things like plaster or spackling paste, and you can see right here where the paint has come up, and hopefully you can see that delta in height where I've kind of gone through and filled in between everywhere, and doing it that way is really kind of a pain in the butt. So as I was thinking about what am I going to do here, I want to try and get this end of Bel Air completed, and I remembered something called Ground Goop, which I've never used before. So I thought, well, why don't we give that a try? So ultimately, we're going to make up some ground goop and hopefully completely fill in all the areas here. You can see I've put some buildings in here in Bel Air, trying to think about how I'm going to lay it out and what it's going to look like. But I've got all of this area in between the tracks and down here as well. It all needs to get filled in and have the level raised up a little bit closer to track level. So that's what's going to be the guinea pig for this ground goop. So when I decided to try this ground goop technique, I went on to YouTube, of course, and watched a number of videos from different model railroaders in the community to see how they did it. And what I found was two common denominators. One, everybody referenced Lou Sassy, who was apparently the originator of this technique, and the second was that they all made some modification to the recipe. There are only 4 ingredients in Lou Sassy's original, or 5, I guess, one's optional, 4 ingredients in his original recipe. First, you have white glue, and apparently Lou Sassy recommended not using Elmer's school glue, but actually using something like Elmer's Glue All. That's the first one. The second ingredient is something called celluclay, which is very similar to Sculptamold. It's a paper mache product, but it does not have any plaster in it, so it's just a paper mache, incredibly powdery. As you can see on the table here, it got everywhere, just taking a handful out and putting it in the container so that you could see what it looks like. So that's the second ingredient. The third ingredient is vermiculite, and this is something that you used in gardening to loosen up soil. You mix it in with soil, and it loosens the soil up, keeps it airy, and allows it to hold moisture better. But this is something that you put in to give some texture to it. It's very light. It's recommended that you get what's called the fine grade. I bought this on Amazon. It says it's 1 to 3 millimeter in size, the particles. So vermiculite is ingredient number 3. And the final ingredient in Lou Sassy's original recipe was latex paint. And here's where I'm going to deviate from his recipe, and I did find others who have used acrylic paint as well. So I'm just going to use some brown acrylic paint rather than latex paint, just because it's easier to get, and from the YouTube videos that I watched, it seems to work every bit as well. Some people have said that maybe it doesn't cover the vermiculite particles as well as the latex paint. If you don't get good coverage of the particles, you can always just go back and paint over the installed surface once it's done. The fifth ingredient, which is optional, is some concentrated Lysol or something similar to prevent mold or mildew, and that's necessary if you plan to store this. But if you're going to store it for any period of time, you probably want to add that Lysol, just a couple capfuls of Lysol or some similar product that inhibits mold into it. I'm not going to do that because my intent is to use up everything that I make. I'm just going to make up, we'll start off with 1 batch. So the ratio of the ingredients is 1 part of the celluclay, 1 part of the vermiculite, 1 part of paint, and then 2/3 or 3/4 part of Elmer's glue. So somewhere in that range. So after you've mixed it up, they recommend that you seal it up in an airtight container and you let it sit for at least a day, as it takes a while for the liquids, the 2 wet ingredients, to really get in and permeate through all that dry celluclay material and really come together. So we're going to mix up a batch this morning, and it's Saturday morning, and then tomorrow afternoon we will try putting it on the layout and see how it goes. Alright, we're going to start with our dry ingredients first. So we have 1 part of the celluclay into the bucket. There you can see how powdery it is. And now 1 part of the vermiculite. And we'll go ahead and mix all of that together first. Try to get it well mixed. Alright, and now we will add the one part of the paint. Let's go ahead and use this thing. And then finally, we need the glue. Okay, so I'm going to go with about 2/3 a part of glue. Another thing that I didn't mention that's an advantage to using the acrylic paint over latex paint is apparently the latex, if you get it on something and allow it to dry, it's very difficult to actually get it off, whereas apparently it's much easier to get the acrylic paint off of things. One person talked about they used Kato Unitrack, and they got some of this stuff on that track, and even after it had dried a couple days later, they were able to clean it up without any issue. Okay, so now I've got it all well mixed, and believe me, you do need to mix it quite a bit, because every time you think you've got it all mixed, you dig back down in there and you find a whole new cache of dry celluclay that hasn't been mixed in yet. But as you can see, once you get it mixed, it's this, I don't know, what do you call that? But it's a thick texture. It's looks like it'll spread really well. Like I said, the recommendation is you let this sit overnight, give it another stir the next day, and then I can apply it. So I'm going to find an airtight container, we'll seal this up, and then we'll be back tomorrow. Alright, there we go. In a semi-airtight container, but inside of a Ziploc bag. So that should keep it airtight enough until tomorrow. So we'll be back. Okay, so it's the next day. We've given this a little bit of a mix. And I've decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just right here as my initial test to see how this works out. I've got a couple of tools. I got the large spatula plus a couple of small painter spatulas to help maybe get in to the tight corners. So we'll now give this a try. So spreading on pretty good. So I was worried about with that vermiculite, how does it spread? So I'm going to try and bring this up to basically the same level and then get it to be reasonably flat and level. But of course the whole purpose of this was to get something that gives us texture. Also, one of the main things I talked about earlier is I want to try and use this to help bring ground level up closer to track level. Alright, let me press on with this, and we'll come back when I've made a little more progress and we can take a look at how it turned out. Okay, so we've got the goop put down in this area here. I think it did a pretty good job of creating some ground effect. I've got some texture. I tried to get rid of most of the lines that occurred from putting it down with the spatulas and get it reasonably level, because there are two industries that are going to have to come in here and sit. But you can see it filled up next to the height of the track quite well. So now what we'll need to do is just wait and see how long it takes to dry and what it looks like when it's finished. So we will be back. So it's now 24 hours later. It's 10:30 in the morning on Monday. Taking a look at where we're at 24 hours after laying it down. No appreciable change in the color. It looks like the color is going to stay consistent as it dries. It is not yet completely dry. I can still feel it's still pliable as I push on it, so it's going to take a bit more time to dry. So we will continue to wait and see how long it actually does take to dry. So it is now Wednesday afternoon, so it's been since Sunday morning that we did the install, but now it is definitely completely dry. Ready for the next treatment, which will be to put down some actual real dirt on top of it, and then we can start working on ground foam, static grass, and whatever else we decide to do there. But that will be for another episode. Thanks for watching.